today, and callings in terms of listening and following our authentic calling. Based on this book by Greg Lavoie. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a real excellent book in terms of us knowing and following our spiritual path that is not always easy. If it were easy, we wouldn't be caught up in so many dilemmas, right? So during the month of February, we'll be focusing every message on that, and it's all about being authentic, being in our authentic selves. So I'm going to start with reading from the Gospel of John, scripture when Jesus and Nicodemus have a little conversation, and Jesus is wondering why Nicodemus doesn't quite understand about the omnipresence of spirit. Verse 8. So the wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. So as we talk about callings, we want to make sure we understand that a calling is a summons, a spiritual summons. And it's like the wind. It's coming to us, but it's not in the form of spoken word. It is in the form of nuance and hints and subtleties that you and I need to catch, because God, Spirit, is trying to get our attention all the time. From our daily grind, you might say, our ordinary lives, into a sacred conversation. And that means moving into a sense of communion with Spirit on that which is greater than ourselves in our human situation. So a calling is not a fleeting whim. It's not a fancy. It's a message from beyond. So if we ask, well, now who's doing the summoning? We can say, well, it's Spirit, God, the unconscious, the soul, the consciousness. So it's all of the above. It's all that we are aware of, and we're not separate from it at all. But something is happening and internally that's moving us and trying to wake us up. So we can say definitely it is source consciousness that knows that it knows that it knows before you and I know that it knows. You understand? Scott Peck says it this way in The Road Less Traveled. Spirit is always 2 steps ahead of us. We're just waking up into what it already knows. And so in order to make our lives a little easier, wouldn't it be good for us to be connecting with it quicker? Yeah, definitely. So if you're tracking what I'm saying, all about you and I deepening our level of awareness and being conscious about Spirit trying to help us in our daily lives. It can come through a hunch, intuition, a premonition, crazy dream, but definitely there's a conversation to be had. Now, Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun, wonderful writer, says it is so hard for us to stay put. Staying put means not being caught up in actions, not being caught up in addictions, compulsions. It really means just listening and dropping into that which is attempting to help us at all times. So this can be a walk in. It can be the wind again. It can be just a calling to go see the mountains. It can be a dream. A message is coming through to you in a different way. It can be from a friend befriending you. It can be from a critical remark that comes to you. It can come up from journaling, such as the Artist's Way class that we're going to start next week. It can come from taking the Myers-Briggs inventory or the Enneagram. All of these personality indicators help us understand ourselves as spirit. Staying put means that we can actually listen to what our higher selves are trying to say to us. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to be the burning bush or the flaming chariot. It can be what T.S. Eliot says, our lives are measured out in the small things, like coffee spoons. Just a tiny little subtle message coming to us that is an aha. That is a calling. And so if we're not careful, you and I can miss the small things, can't we? And then we miss what's really happening around us. So when we actually do begin to stop, stay put, we can make a breakthrough. Now, the breakthrough happens generally when something shakes us up in life, gives us the opportunity to reflect, but we must be willing, you understand. There's a surrender involved, willingness to be shaken up. Rather than blaming external events or people or situations, what we do is begin to look at it from a spiritual perspective. As the poet Rumi suggests, if you feel like your tree is being shaken, consider it's God that's doing the shaking. So if we look at the story of Jonah and the whale, Jonah has jumped into a raging sea, but instead of being consumed by it, he lands up in the belly of the whale, the unconscious, where he can rest and reflect and see he's not running away from God. He's really running to God, where he's going to receive the benefit. But he must choose. And as the story turns out, he does choose God's way, and he lets his way stop. He puts an end to that, and he listens. He receives a benediction. He receives the blessing. So you too can receive the benediction. So let's look at how we do that. Now, if we look at our lives in terms of thirds, if we see the first third of our lives, you and I incarnate as spirit. Do you believe that? I do. I look at that little innocent child and I see the original blessing. I do not see original sin. And I see the opportunity that exists as potential within each of us as we come into life. But you know, as we go along in life, things happen. We get sullied. We get dirtied. And we go through life trying to, then this first part of our lives, developing a mask, an ego mask to protect us. We build up core defenses to protect us so we can survive. And these mechanisms are in place just so we can handle our daily lives. But if we go through and muster enough courage to move into the second phase of life and begin waking up, oh, maybe I am a spiritual being having spiritual experiences in this human condition. I can see I'm not so bad. I'm just an ordinary person trying to get through. And we begin to have an awareness that this is working for me, that's not working for me, this does work. And we begin to sort through what's best for us. Now, it does mean that we make ourselves vulnerable. Anyone remember the Brene book that we studied this past summer about daring greatly? Being vulnerable puts us in a place of choice. It also helps us remember, as she says, that we are not broken. We may think we are. We are not broken. Spirit reminds us that there's communication coming to us all the time to give us hope, not despair in any situation. So this is the place, the second part of our lives is all about a transition. It's all about transformation and change and being open to it occurring. So this is the place where Spirit really shows up in our lives, and we're reminded that we have an identity separate from our ego functions And we call that the witness or the Christ within our divine essence. That's who we are. We begin waking up to it. And we're able to burn away that which keeps us imprisoned in old thoughts and old behaviors. And we begin to see freedom is possible. So when we move into the third stage, this is the stage where we slow down and we start developing mindful practices. Barbara reminds us of that when we meet her for meditations on Sundays. Mindful practices means that we're able to really stay put and begin receiving. Now, all the great mystics and spiritual leaders have been able to do this. But guess what? It's also possible for you and me. It's possible for us to know that our soul does progress. And the more soul choices that we are aware of, we begin to realize we're like the prodigal son. We just kind of veer away and go in that direction. But when we begin to remember, I am the beloved, and I can return to my Father's rich kingdom as the prince or the princess, and we go back home, we realize that we've always been there. It was always been possible to live in that place. And that's where we have the wisdom. And that's where we receive the grace, the unconditional love. Now, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, wrote a great book, and it's called The Red Book. And when he wrote the first words, they're so poignant for us to remember. He wrote, "My soul, my soul." And it's as if he, at that point, was retrieving that which he too had lost. And he's bringing it back and doing his soul work and reconnecting with it. That's what a calling is. That's the spiritual summons. And you and I will find that we are called until we finally begin dealing with them. Now, we know it's not easy. If it were easy and simple, life would be a breeze. But you and I know that it takes effort for us to have an open heart so that we can say, "Speak to my heart, Holy Spirit. Here I am," and stay in this prayer and meditation. So we need to begin to look at this a little bit objectively and say, all right, so I'm willing to open now to Spirit. Here are two questions that you can ask. What is right for me? And where am I willing to be led? What is right for me? And where am I willing to be led? So this calling is not an order. It's not an ultimatum. It's a choice. And perhaps our deepest authentic selves can only be hinted at, like spirit in disguise. And if we begin to listen, then we need to act and respond. So let's just think about ways then of the forms that this call can make. Suppose that you have a dream that keeps recurring and something is pursuing you. Might that be a calling? I would say, yes, pay attention to that dream. Or a symptom that reoccurs, pain in the neck or pain in the shoulder. Something might be trying to come through. A conversation that you heard in a restaurant by total strangers, but it seemed to pertain to you exactly. Or a situation that is created in a relationship that causes some friction and discomfort. Maybe you're called to do some healing in that relationship. What about song lyrics that get in your head and you just can't get them out? Or divine ideas that come in meditations and you never act on them? Or decisions you've made, but there's been no resolution. These are all signs. These are all ways. They're not ultimatums, but they're ways that Spirit is trying to get our attention. And so when we think of a calling that keeps surfacing like it did for Jonah, we know that when you and I are in the belly of the whale and we just sink into it, that we receive the benediction, the blessing, so that we can come back out of it to stronger, to teach, to serve, to minister, to be authentic. So the mythologist Joseph Campbell said this very poignant remark, that we're having experiences all the time that hint at our hungers, our deepest longings. But he insisted this, that what we're trying to do is awaken the power of repression in ourselves, that is tolerating the pain, so that we may pay attention to the awareness trying to break through. You understand? Okay, let me go through it one more time. He said that what we're trying to awaken is the power of repression. We're just keeping it away from ourselves. We're not letting it speak to us, as Katrina's saying. So we have this power of keeping it away and repressing it and tolerating this pain, when all the time we need to awaken to that which is going to bless us. Okay? And so at this point, what we know is that we need time and space in order for this to happen. Cannot happen overnight if you really give it your best to just sink into. We need to be very self-loving, and we need to be very accepting and curious about what's happening. More space to reflect on what Spirit is calling us to do. So hushing judgment and judgmental remarks are not helpful at this point. What is helpful is for us to listen internally to what Spirit is saying. Now, Wednesday night's Faith Lift is talking about the Gospel of Thomas. I know Richard and Peggy have both spoken to this wonderful book. And here's the premise of it, that if you bring forth that which is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, it will destroy you. Hence, listening, reflecting, and responding is our job in order to know our authentic steps, know who we really are. It requires space, but it's our life's work. It's our soul work. So for myself, in the last 9 to 12 months, I've been doing some wonderful soul work, not so easy, but I've been reflecting on what is mine to do in terms of being in the church. And I did make the decision to retire. Now, if you know me at all, you know I don't stop easily. I don't tire easily. I'm just like the ever-ready bunny. I keep going until I get turned around and I'm going in a different direction. And so my focus here has been to support the church in every way for the last 10 years and be a part of as many groups and teams and build healing ways, support every program, support the prosperity of this church and all of us in our spiritual growth. But we've moved on. We've grown up, haven't we? And we've moved from pastoral into a program church that requires some real technical skills, requires new people, it requires new energy, it requires things that I'm limited in doing. And so anytime there's a high stress level indicates your work is done. And that's how it appeared to me. And that I needed to let go and trust that others would step forward. And I do. I have great faith that each of you will step forward in supporting the life of this church, the energy of this church. And you know how I feel now? Are you curious? I feel great relief. God has gotten my full attention. And within me, it's good to let go, so that I can receive new blessings and serve in a new and wonderful way. So looking back, this decision is a no-brainer. I'm returning to that which I love. I'm returning to spiritual counseling, but I'm doing it in a different way and learning how to support people in bringing up which is unconscious to the consciousness. Overall, what appears as a sacrifice is really, for me, a privilege. How about that? So, what we want to do for each of us, I believe, is to pay attention to these calls, pay attention to the hints, the nuances, the remarks, the songs, the awareness that you have, and write them down, because Spirit is trying to get your attention. Do you believe that now? Yes. You believe it? Okay. So remember, there are two great questions to ask because there's no imperative. You have all the choices in the world, what you do, but first asking, what is right for me? And where am I willing to be led? So that you really feel that you are in divine order, you are in alignment with Spirit's call, and you're heeding it, and you're paying attention in just the right and perfect way. And when you do that, you know you've been blessed. So I want to say to all of you, wow, it has been a wonderful 10 years. I'm looking forward to being part of the church in different ways, but in particular, the ministerial staff here has been fabulous. Working with Richard, working with Peggy, my soul sister, working with Barbara and Fred Hess, this is clearly a dedicated, committed group of people, and I want you to know that. And the team leaders and the board and the finance team, all of the people that support the real life of this church are dedicated and committed as well. So all of you, maybe we haven't had as much time together as we have wanted to, know that all of us are teachers to one another, aren't we? And when we share with one another the great wisdom, we know that we're connecting on levels that are far greater than just this normal conversation. We're saying, I'm here for you, I hear you, or what are you doing? You might ask these questions so that there is this conversation that's ongoing, and God is connecting us together. So there's a song that I want to share with you that 20 years ago when I came into Unity, I heard by a man